Should start and welcome back again, Dr. Atul Bhaskar, dear friend and very renowned pediatric orthopedic surgeon. And thank you very much for giving time for this class. And today the lecture is on CTEV and congenital vertical talus. Dr. Bhaskar, please.
Okay, so I'll just start sharing my screen. My plan is to cover two topics today. One is on the vertical talus, and the other one is on clubfoot. You can see the screen?
Yes, yes.
See it, yeah. So these are two common anomalies which are seen in pediatric practice. Usually the vertical talus is much more rarer compared to clubfoot. I'm just trying to advance the screen. One second, it's not advancing. Huh?
Just click in the center of the screen.
Okay, so clubfoot is 1 per 1,000 child per children born, whereas vertical talus is almost 1 per 20,000. So there's a big difference. But in both these conditions, you can have feet which are either typical or atypical type of clubfoot, or you can have a syndromic or idiopathic vertical talus. Diagnosis is usually clinical in clubfoot, whereas for vertical talus you need an X-ray. Treatment is Ponseti for clubfoot and reverse Ponseti for CVT. The treatment which was really popularized by Ponseti still holds true to date, and for early clubfoot we always use this technique. And now recently in the last 10 years for vertical talus, we've been using what is called the Dobbs or the reverse Ponseti technique. Treatment usually continues till the child starts to walk, and most of the problems will come around walking age. So early relapses in clubfoot, whereas in vertical talus sometimes they're not even diagnosed, especially in a chubby child, and so they come at walking age. And in both these conditions you need soft tissue surgeries and then bony surgeries and salvage surgeries. So by and large these conditions are both very parallel, but the clinical appearance is totally the opposite. So I'll start with vertical talus, which is more rarer. And from the exam point of view, what one has to understand is, you need to know the onset of the condition, which is obviously from birth. But there is some, you should touch upon some antenatal history, whether there was any history of oligohydramnios, or there was paucity of movements. Because in syndromic children, you will have, these mother will report there was less movement when she was in pregnancy. Milestones are very important for a child for any condition. So what age he started walking, sitting, standing. Again, they may be delayed for the syndromic type. Whether any treatment has been taken for vertical talus, so sometimes manipulation are taught to parents very early, what intervention has been done, and what is the ambulatory potential. So all this should come in your brief history when you present a case of vertical talus, and we'll try and cover each one of these points. So when you look at the foot in general, you start looking from either from the front or to the back. So from the forefoot to midfoot and hindfoot, look at the footwear. You look at you palpate the feet, look at the range of movement, a neurological examination, and then of course you do the special test like for gait analysis. Now if you look at the vertical talus classically, you must start with the shape of the foot. You can see the classical rocker bottom appearance. The midfoot and the hindfoot is convex. There is the heel is pointing upwards. So you comment on the soft tissue contour. You see less creases here as compared to a clubfoot where you'll see more creases. Then you comment on the shape of the foot. So typically it's called rocker bottom shape. And then you can comment on from the AP view, you can see that it's in planar valgate deformity. So this is what you can tell on inspection. Then on palpation, you look at the bony prominences. So typically you'll see that the calcaneus is in equinus, the tender achilles is very, very tight. The hindfoot will be in valgus. The head of the talus is found medially, so it is found here, whereas in clubfoot it is found laterally. And you can see from the appearance on the AP view that the foot is pointing laterally, so it's an abducted forefoot with medial prominence, and you can see that the lateral border is concave. So this will tell us that this is a planar valgate foot. Such an appearance can also be seen in a severe oblique talus or even a calcaneal valgus foot, but both these conditions are flexible. So that's what brings us to the range of movement. So when you have stiff movement, especially restriction of plantar and dorsiflexion of the ankle, Subtalar movements are difficult to assess, but if there is restriction or inversion and the calculus is in abduction, you can comment that the subtalar movements are restricted, and you can feel the tautness of the peroneal tendons, or what is called peroneal tightness. So that is what keeps the forefoot into abduction. And this typical appearance, if it is not flexible, should allude to a vertical talus, and then you will you will confirm these by X-rays. Very few conditions present with a rigid deformity in the neonatal period, which has got rigid foot. So vertical talus should be on top of your mind. I have seen these children being diagnosed as calculovalgus foot because nobody has examined the range of movement, and that is what is critical to differentiate between an oblique talus and a congenital vertical talus. For any of these conditions, if the child comes to at an older age, you look at the progression of the deformity, whether the child gets any pain. Pain is rare unless there is callosities, any concern with the shoe wear, and of course a family history for syndromic conditions. So you must perform a head to toe examination, look for any scars or any dimples at the back of the spine, which will point to a neurogenic problem. So there are a couple of classifications of vertical talus from the exam point of view. You can either use this simple classification by Ogata, which divides the vertical talus into the neuromuscular type, the syndromic type, or the idiopathic type. So it's easy to remember. Typically for the first two, you will need some kind of neurological input so that you don't miss any other issues with the child. But the most comprehensive classification was given by Hamanishi. This is now quite well accepted. It is difficult to remember, but in short, it basically covers the syndromic foot, the neuromuscular foot, malformation, and then finally the idiopathic club foot. Among these also, there are different types depending on whether they've got other deformities. So you may have a foot deformity, but you may have some problems in the digits. Some of them have a relative with oblique talus, but by and large, they will have a normal neurological examination. So most of these children will fall into idiopathic variety. I must say out of the 100%, about 20% idiopathic. 80% of vertical talus are usually associated with some kind of syndrome. So in the exam, you'll probably see one of these. It's very rare to get idiopathic club foot. So how do you differentiate between a vertical talus and oblique talus? The classical X-ray, which has been described, is what is called the stress plantar flexion view. And then you can do a stress dorsiflexion view to look at the mobility of the ankle joint. Occasionally, you may need to do an MRI scan if there is multiple involvement, other joint involvement, and you suspect a neurological cause. CT scan and 3D reconstruction are not required unless the child comes to you at a later age and you're planning complex bony osteotomies. So typically for vertical talus, the stress plantar flexion view is a key. So in a stress plantar flexion view, you will find the talar line, the mid-talar line, and the first metatarsal axis is parallel. So they will be collinear, whereas in a true vertical talus, you will find there will be an angle between the talus and the first metatarsal base angle. And if this angle is more than 30 degrees in plantar flexion, it is diagnostics of congenital vertical talus. So this is a key X-ray to take, a stress plantar flexion view. And you can also do a dorsiflexion view where you will find restriction of the hindfoot movement. So this is what you should correlate with. So you must have some correlation. If you can get these lines parallel, you draw these lines and you know that this is an oblique talus. The other angles which are important from the exam point of view, in the AP view, in the slightly older child, you can look at the AP angle as well as the AP talocalcaneal angle. The AP angle for which goes from the first base of the metatarsal and the talar angle. So talar first metatarsal angle called the Tamba angle, which is very important to look at the forefoot adduction or the abduction. And in the lateral view, you have what is called the lateral talar axis, first metatarsal base axis. So these are the lateral axis. So you can see here the first metatarsal base and the talar angle. So this usually it is less than 10 to 15 degrees. And then you can do the calcaneal angle. So you have tibiocalcaneal angle as well. So you have angle line going from the base of the calcaneum and then parallel to the tibia. So this gives you the calcaneal pitch, which is reduced in vertical talus. So these angles are important to draw, especially in an older child. And if you're planning to do surgery, because unlike a club foot, we don't take any X-rays. But in vertical talus, we always do an X-ray and we try and restore the talus axis in line with the first metatarsal axis. So this is an example of those angles. So the changing point between flexible oblique talus to rigid vertical talus is a talar first axis angle of about 60 degrees and a calculus axis, base axis about 20 degrees. So this is what I mean about, this is the oblique talus here, and you can see this is the first metatarsal angle. So this is less than 20 degree. If it's more than 20, then it points towards the vertical talus. So draw these angles. Similarly, you can draw on the AP view. This is the talar axis, and this is the calculus axis. So this is a talar calculus angle, which is more than 45 degrees, and it tells you that the forefoot is abducted. So these are the way to do an X-ray. So you keep a radio opaque marker, so you can do a stress dorsiflexion view, and this view tells you that the heel is in equinus, and you can get this picture even in a rocker bottom foot, which is created iatrogenically when you manipulate a club foot. So you can get a similar picture, but your talus will not be so oblique. If you see, the talus is almost vertical in line with the tibia. So this is a true vertical talus, and here it tells you that the hind foot is in severe equinus, and that's why it tells you that the TA is very, very tight. Now, as far as treatment is concerned, Coleman had given a brief classification looking at the calcaneal cuboid joint, because in very severe vertical talus, you can have dislocation of the calcaneal cuboid joint. That means one has to address the lateral soft tissue structures as well when you treat the vertical talus. So this is a very old classification, not relevant today since we're using other axes. But one must study the calcaneal cuboid joint, and if it is dislocated, you need a lateral soft tissue release in addition to your medial and plantar release. Treatment of vertical talus, as far as exams are concerned, for with any treatment in foot, you start with the conservative treatment, which is now popular in the last 10 years, unlike the Ponseti, which has been popular for the last 30 years. And what they do nowadays is what is called the reverse Ponseti. You start giving plasters in equinovarus position. So you're basically trying to create a club foot. So once you are able to get the talus elevated and the TA a bit stretched, then you can go for a soft tissue release. The advantage of doing a plaster technique is that you prevent massive soft tissue releases, which was done in the past. But this is usually successful if the child comes early. Even in the older child, you can give few plasters and at least get the lateral structure stretched before you do an open release. If you find there's no correction by 6 months, then you consider a surgical release. Now in club foot, we give about 5 to 6 plasters before we do a tenotomy. In a vertical talus, one can give up to 10 to 12 plasters because it is a much more rigid deformity. It can be done in the outpatient, and except for the last 1 or 2 plasters, you need a short anesthesia so you can assess the angles under the C-arm. You can assess whether you're getting a talar elevation or not. So this is the technique of manipulation. This was described by Dobbs, and we also published almost 12 years ago what is called the reverse Ponseti technique, where you actually manipulate the foot. So you're not touching the heel, you're basically trying to get the foot supinated and inverted, and you push the talar head upwards. Now this is very good for the idiopathic vertical talus, but it may not be very effective in a syndromic child. But the advantage of stretching it, you will stretch the lateral capsule, the lateral peroneal tendon, and that can avoid releases on the lateral side. So this is a technique which is called the reverse Ponseti casting, and this is now very, very popular on what described by Matthew Dobbs. And these are the results of that. So you can see this is the kind of axis correction you get by the end of your 7 plasters, and this is what this is the initial plasters where you're trying to create a cavus. So you push the talar head upwards, and by the time you reach to a 7th, 8th plaster, you should have a picture like this. And then this child, so this was the starting point. This is the vertical talus, this is the left side, and after serial plaster and after an open release, you can see the mark of the K-wire. You get the talus back in normal alignment, and these children have to be protected in a splint. So usually they are given these kind of A4s with the medial mold, and when we do the surgical correction, we put a talo navicular wire as well, so that you can maintain the correction. This wire is kept for about 6 weeks. So you do the reverse Ponseti, about 8 to 10 plasters, and then you go ahead and do a soft tissue release from the medial side, elevate the talus, do a tear release from the back, and do a pinning of the talonavicular joint. Now, what happens to a walking age child? When the child comes at a later age, the deformities are much more rigid. You can see that the talus is pointing downwards. The calcaneum is in equinus, and usually the treatment for a walking age child is posterior release, a medial release, and tip post advancement. Occasionally, one may have to make a sling of the tibialis anterior, which is then sutured to the talus with an anchor, and lateral lengthening of the peroneal tendon and the extensor digitorum longus. So these are what is called an a la carte release. You have to do a posterior release, you have to do a medial release, and you have to do a tip post plication for an older child. The sling technique is not very popular. It is only done for recurrent vertical talus, and Z lengthening is done for cases where you have not done serial plasters and they come to you fresh, where the lateral structures are tight. So this is the technique for soft tissue release. The surgical procedure which has been described, you can either do a Cincinnati incision, so do a single incision which goes medial to lateral. This is the tip post tendon which has been elevated. You can see the talar is pointing vertically here. So this talonavicular capsule has to be released. The dorsal capsule, the middle capsule is released, and the talar is exposed. You expose the TA from the back, and you do a Z lengthening, and from the back you put a wire which is a joystick wire, elevate the talus, and then pass this wire through and through into the first metatarsal. And to maintain the calcaneal pitch, you also put a wire going from the calcaneum into the tibia. So one can do a release from the back, which this incision goes right up to the base of the cuboid. So you can do even a lateral release from this side. And this has been described by using the Cincinnati technique. So this is how you always approach it from the back after you make a posterior incision. Elevate the talus from the back, joystick it, and then pass an antegrade wire. And always put a wire from the calcaneum as well, so that you can maintain the talonavicular correction as well. Remember that the talus is in, the calcaneum is in abduction, it is in eversion, rather than in a clubfoot where it is in varus. Here the hindfoot is in valgus. So you do a reverse Z lengthening. You cut the lateral half of the tendo achilis and not the medial half. What do you do in clubfoot? This is a paper which was described from India, where from PGI Chandigarh, where they use a dorsal approach. So instead of going from the back, they are using it from the front. So these children have not had any plasters. They only release all the soft tissue structures in the front, and then do a posterior TA release, and then they put a wire from the back as well as a wire from the front. So this technique can be done for the mild case of vertical talus, not for the very severe cases where you have to do a medial plication as well. So this is the result of the dorsal approach. This is the Indian experience, and this has been well described, published in 2009. This was from PGI Chandigarh, where they've done only a posterior incision for TA lengthening, but primarily they've gone in the front. So these are mainly for the idiopathic variety, not for the syndromic ones, and not for the very severe ones. Now, this is the part of vertical talus. What I'll do is, if there are any questions, we can take them now, or I can complete the clubfoot as well, and then we can take some questions later. Should I go ahead with the clubfoot?
Yes, I think go ahead, sir. We'll take the questions at the end.
So clubfoot is just the reverse of vertical talus. You have to have the same logical order of taking the history. So in clubfoot, typically parents will come with an antenatal scan. So there may be an occasion where the examiner will show you a scan and ask you how early can you diagnose a clubfoot. The earliest one can diagnose clubfoot is 12 weeks. Between 8 to 12 weeks, you can diagnose a clubfoot. You cannot, however, assess the severity of the clubfoot. The other question is, how early can you commence your casting? So you can commence casting as early as on the second day, or also on the day of the birth, as long as the child doesn't need any neonatal care. One has to assess the severity of the clubfoot. One has to be familiar with the Pirani score, and again you must distinguish between a typical and an atypical clubfoot. And here the technique of casting varies. So from the exam point of view, one has to know, all these important points about clubfoot. Many of us will, just will get stuck in this area. How do you assess a clubfoot, and how do you manipulate? So we'll just touch upon that in a bit of detail. We all know that the clubfoot, what we see in practice is the idiopathic variety, and it's got 5 deformities. It's got a cavus, adductus, varus, equinus, and also the forefoot adduction. So and the lateral border, the midfoot varus as well, or supination. So cavus, adductus, varus, supination, and equinus. So there are 5 components to it, and the technique of manipulation has been very well described by Dr. Ponseti. You approach it from the first ray and then passively abduct, and I'll go into a bit of detail. So although you see only 4 deformities here, don't forget the first deformity is supination, and that's why we call it caves, and that is what is classically seen in idiopathic clubfoot. The hindfoot is not only in varus and equinus, but also it's translated and inverted, and that is very well shown in these cadaveric diagrams, and you can also see where the talus is pointing. Unlike in a vertical talus where the talus is pointing medially, here the talus points laterally. So you can see the talar head, this is the heel, the talar head is pointing laterally, which is very well seen here on the X-ray, and this is used as our fulcrum for manipulation. One must be familiar with the Pirani scores in the exam point of view. You should know what is the midfoot score and what is the hindfoot score. So how you can grade the foot from 0 to 1 for the lateral border. This is the posterior crease. This is the medial crease, residual equinus, the lateral covering of the talar head, and the equinus deformity. So you must be able to grade a clubfoot looking at these points. So typically you can have 3 points for the midfoot and 3 points for the hindfoot. So posterior crease, residual equinus, and heel contracture, all are part of the hindfoot score. The lateral border, the middle crease, and the talar head are part of the midfoot score. And the score is 0 if your lateral border is straight. If the forefoot is curved, it is 0.5. If the midfoot is also curved with the forefoot, it is 1. Similarly for the medial crease, if the crease is very, very deep, it is 1. If there are few creases seen, then it is 0.5, and there's no crease, it is 0. So one must have a mental picture when you grade an idiopathic clubfoot. Similarly for the equinus, you can look at the deep posterior crease. If there will be a single crease, it is 1. You can see the equinus, whether the foot can be corrected to dorsiflexion, neutral or equinus, and the empty heel. So you palpate the empty heel and you can see whether it is easily palpable, then it is 0. If the heel is not palpable, then it is 1. That means you will feel it like a soft tissue. So empty heel is an important sign. Many of these will overlap. As long as you can grade the clubfoot into these score, you are able to judge the severity of the clubfoot. This is another example of how you judge the medial crease. You can see the deep crease here, few creases here, 2 or 3 creases which are flexible, and there's no crease here. Similarly for the lateral border and lateral head of talus. So this is very important to understand the Pirani score. And typically when you see the clubfoot first time, you score the child, and with every plaster, you then score the child with every visit. So this is how you score at 1 week, 2 weeks, 3 weeks, and you should find that the midfoot score should come down. So if you look at the midfoot score, this is the midfoot score, and this is the hindfoot score, and this is the total score. Typically by a 5th plaster, your midfoot score should become 0. So here you see the midfoot score is 0, your hindfoot score is 3, and your total score is 3. So this is a time it tells you when you want to intervene to do a tenotomy. So the Pirani score guides your treatment. It also tells you whether you're getting a relapse. It also tells you whether it's a syndromic foot, because if you don't get a midfoot score to 0 by 3 or 4 weeks, that means you're dealing with an atypical clubfoot, or your technique of casting is wrong. Hence, it is very important to have a graphic representation of your serially decreasing score. So it tells you flexibility. What the Pirani score doesn't assess is the everter power, and many times you see children, they are very weak peroneae, and that is one of the causes of relapse. And also it doesn't assess the fanning of the toes. So when you examine the child from the exam point of view, you must look at the peroneal power, whether you can see the heel, the lateral border of the toe moving, and whether you can see all the toes moving when you stimulate the sole. Typically the great toe should extend. If it doesn't extend, if it keeps flex, that means you're dealing with an atypical clubfoot. So in a child with idiopathic clubfoot, the toe movement should be normal. That is very important to differentiate between typical and atypical clubfoot. Calf size again is smaller in clubfoot. So if you have one-sided clubfoot, always examine the calf size. You can measure the midfoot circumference and comment on that. Remember, the clubfoot affects the entire leg from the knee to the foot. So don't only examine the foot, but you must comment on the calf size as well and the power. If the child is walking, you must comment on the foot size. So usually if it's one unilateral, the foot size is smaller, at least by one size or up to a centimeter. And like I said, as you do serial plasters, you will find that the toes will start flexing because the FHL and the FDL will get tighter. And that is why when you do your plaster technique, you must make sure you're also extending the toes, and the plaster extends right up to the toes. Don't leave the toes free as you do for conventional plasters. You want to check the movement. But in the clubfoot, you must go right up to the IP joint and make sure you're able to extend the IP joint as well. The other classification they may ask in the exam is the Dimiglios grading, which basically is a very, very subjective classification. It looks at the forefoot and the hindfoot flexibility. It looks at the derotation of the foot in the coronal plane, and also looks at the forefoot rotation in the horizontal plane. More or less, this classification is not used because it is very complex. It is highly subjective. A grade 4 club means grade 4 is a severe clubfoot, and grade 1 is a mild clubfoot. So they also have given a typical French style, soft clubfoot, soft, hard, hard, soft, and hard, hard. So that basically means the hard part is both in the midfoot and the hindfoot. So these are not very, very commonly used, and it's also very difficult to judge with every week what is the flexibility. So this grading is just for exam point of view, but not really very popular. What are the limitations of both the grading system? There are too many permutations. Each score is not equally weighted because a hindfoot score of 2 and 1.5 may mean the same. There's something called a ceiling effect. So score of 2 and 3, for example, if an empty heel can score anywhere between 1.5 to 2. So basically, any score of between 2 and 3 means the same thing. And what it cannot affect is the everter strength. This is very important as far as recurrence is concerned. So that is why there is some limitation to the scoring system. In case you're doing very, very well, the examiner can ask you what is the problem with the Pirani score, and these are the problems. It has what is called a ceiling effect, because sometimes you cannot really decipher between a score of 1.1 to 2 or 2 to 2.5. Again, remember that the calf is always atrophic, and there have been some studies looking at calf atrophy. Many students I find in the exam, they forget to examine the calf, and the examiner will ask you, what about the leg? Have you seen the entire leg? Don't forget to look at the limb length as well. Sometime in severe clubfoot in a walking child, you must measure the limb length, and there may be mild tibial shortening as well. You must assess the tibial torsion from the tibial tubercle to the bimalar axis, because in clubfoot you will have tibial intorsion. So don't forget the leg as a whole when you examine the clubfoot, and many times in the exam the students forget and they don't look beyond the foot. So you must assess, as far as the treatment is concerned, you will always start off with Ponsonby technique. You must know how to assess the foot, so you must have a mental picture where to put your thumb, where you put your other hand. So you must put this at the base of the first phalanx of the great toe, and the other thumb should be at the fulcrum, which is the talar head, which is just below the lateral malleolus. And your first plaster always involves elevating the first tray. So you correct the pronation into a supination, and that is the key to the further correction. Once you elevate the first tray, later on you just have to abduct the foot, keeping a fulcrum at the talus. And this is what they ask in the exam. Why not keep the toe, the thumb at the heel? Because if you keep the thumb at the heel, the foot will not evert as you abduct the forefoot, and that is the key thing, because of the interlinkage. As you abduct the forefoot, the hindfoot also moves into eversion and dorsiflexion, and that is why the fulcrum has to be on the talus. So these are the steps of correcting a clubfoot, and one must know this by heart. And only once you are able to get the midfoot score to 0, you think of doing what is called a hindfoot correction by doing a tenotomy. So the first cast is critical. You can see here the first cast is given with the foot looking in more supination. Again, the casting should go above the knee always. The knee should be flexed to 90 degrees. The common question is, why do you flex it? because the cast doesn't slip, and secondly, you want to relax the gastrosoleus. That's why you don't put a below knee plaster. Again, when you put the plaster, always look at the toes. Make sure your plaster goes right up to the IP joint so that you're able to stretch the toes as well. And when you're able to get the midfoot straight, so you can see that the midfoot score is 0. You can see there are the multiple fine creases, the lateral border is straight, and the tailor head is well reduced. The only thing remains is the equinus. So you can see there's an equinus, there's an empty heel, deep posterior crease. You can grade this as 2 or 3. But the main thing is there is hindfoot equinus, and this is the time you will plan your tenotomy. You can do further plasters as well, but the idea is so that you quickly correct the deformity so that you can get the foot into a splint for early rehabilitation. So this is the foot which is coming just prior to tenotomy. You can see the deep crease, only equinus. You can see without any force, the midfoot is straight, the toes are pointing straight, and the tailor head is reduced. And this is where you will do your tenotomy, and that is what usually they will ask in the exam, the point you would do your tenotomy. And one must know the technique of tenotomy also. So either you can do it, you always do it from medial to lateral, and you can either do with the 11 number blade or 18 gauge needle. So this is an atypical clubfoot. You can see to show that there are deep creases around the ankle joint as well. The great toe is shorter. The foot is very, very small, and there's significant cavus. So this is a chubby foot. This is an atypical clubfoot, and here you need to use the modified Ponseti protocol, where you will start casting, and you will push not only the first ray, but you push the entire forefoot. So the pressure is on the metatarsal heads and not on the first ray. Rest of the steps are similar. So here you will put pressure on all the metatarsal heads, and then you start correcting the deformity. It may be that you have to do an early tenotomy because cast slippage is very, very high in an atypical clubfoot. So sometimes you may do the tenotomy much earlier, in about 3rd or 4th plaster, and then continue with the Ponseti technique so that you're able to get the foot in a better alignment. Of course, when the child comes later, you can see at the walking age, and this is what you will get in the exams. Child presenting like this, walking on the lateral border. So here you examine the child completely. You can see there is a tibial torsion. The tailor head is prominent. Always comment on the cavus. Look at the foot pointing forward, and from the back, the heel is in varus. It's in supination. And again, you can comment on the callosities. So don't forget to look at the callosities and look at the footwear. Examine the spine so that you don't miss a neuromuscular or a syndromic clubfoot. This is the technique of tenotomy. You can also do what is called a forceps assisted tenotomy. This is the atypical clubfoot. You can see the deep crease. Again, the protocol is same, except here you can do a tenotomy much earlier and then start casting. Some cases of which can come in the exam as a relapse. So you can get relapses like this, where you can see the cut is very, very medial. This child has come back. This child has relapsed because of poor splinting. And so when you take a history in a clubfoot in a walking child, always ask for history of splinting and whether there was any compliance. And I'll discuss relapsed club feet just in a brief while. So I'll just skip this. So this is a technique of tenotomy. You can see the tendon, and you cut it through and through. And this is what the child should appear at follow-up. Now, what I mentioned earlier is that in a clubfoot, you can create a rocker bottom foot as well. You can see this is a vertical talus, but this is not a true vertical talus. This is because this has been created by an iatrogenic breakage of the midfoot because of forefoot force without correcting the equinus. So that is why you must always correct the equinus first before you proceed to correcting the hindfoot. So this is an example of a rocker bottom foot. You can see here that you're pushing on the forefoot, but your talus is in equinus and your heel is in equinus. So this is an iatrogenic rocker bottom foot as compared to a true vertical talus. As far as the older child is concerned, you must be familiar with the Turco release, and I'll just enumerate the steps. So either you can do a classical posterior medial release, you can do a Cincinnati release, you can do a dual incision, a medial and a posterior. And this is what typically I would do, is do a Cincinnati approach. You do a separate incision for the plantar fascia, and at the end of your correction, you must get a good looking plantigrade foot. And the structure which you release I'll just allude to that. The soft tissue release will include the posterior soft tissues, the medial soft tissues, and the bony structures as well in the older child. So you do a lateral column shortening, you do a triple orthodesis for the salvage procedures. You must have some knowledge about the external fixator, which if some examiners are coming from, they've got some experience with just fixators. You must have some idea about the just fixator technique as well. Now coming to relapse, which is the way the child will present to you. Remember one thing: deformity which corrects last recurs first. So equinus, which you correct last, will recur first. The most relapses initially are flexible, and if you get them very early, you can treat them with plasters. And this is what we had classified relapses into. I will not go into much detail, but you must understand that relapses progress from being flexible to stiff, and you can get deformity in one plane or both the planes. So you can get equinus contracture first, followed by forefoot adduction. You can have both adduction as well as equinus, and finally you can have a triple deformity, which is a full-blown relapsed clubfoot. So this is how we classify relapses. You can go from the flexible to the rigid. Early warning signs for relapse are: you must assess the aorta power. If a child got poor perineal power, that means there's high chance of relapse. The persistent great toe flexion, poor extension of the toes, which I mentioned earlier. If there is dynamic supination on weight bearing, and if the child cannot squat, that means there is early loss of dorsiflexion. So this is what we classify as relapses. So you can see this child, there is decrease in ankle dorsiflexion as compared to this side, where you can get almost 15-degree dorsiflexion. So this is the earliest sign of relapse, where you get early loss of dorsiflexion. That means there is equinus happening, and these children, need aggressive splinting and aggressive casting. And usually these are because of poor brace issues. So in the exam, always ask for brace compliance, whether they've been using the brace for 23 hours a day. If they've not been using the brace for adequate time, that means there is a high chance they will relapse. So most of the children will need a retenotomy. So either you can go through the previous scar, or you may need to do a posterior release as well, because sometimes the tendon is very, very tight, and you may need to do a Z lengthening when there's a relapse of the deformity. So because of the scarring at the back, I prefer doing a Z lengthening so that you can get at least 15 degrees of dorsiflexion at the end of your release. And then again, you must replaster the child 2 or 3 times before you put them in a brace. So this is what I talk about: early loss of dorsiflexion, where they can't squat. So this is very important. If the child is able to squat like this, you know that the TA is supple, the ankle joint is supple. And this is the early relapses. So squatting is very, very important sign. And again, in the exam, you can comment about squatting when you look at the function of a child, whether he's able to squat or no. The dynamic supination is because of the overactivity of the T-band or the adductor tendon. So this is seen in a child which has been treated with Ponseti but poor splinting. So they will come with dynamic supination, and you will find that they will have good dorsiflexion, but they will only supinate when they walk. And these children, when they have dynamic supination, the treatment of choice is a T-band transfer. You do what is called a T-band transfer and an abductor hallucis tenotomy. So dynamic supination, you transfer the T-band tendon from the medial side to the medial cuneiform, to the third cuneiform. So this transfer is a very, very effective transfer, typically done at around age 3. So what is called a split T-band transfer. If the child is older, you can do a split transfer. In a younger child, less than 3, I prefer to do a complete transfer. So here you can harvest half the tendon and suture it to the lateral cuneiform with an anchor, or you can pass it through a needle and the thread at the sole of the foot. So this is the technique of partial T-band transfer, and this is very, very commonly used in a child above 3 years. And here you can suture it with a button after you harvest the tendon. So sometimes you got rigid equinus. So this is a child who's got rigid equinus. This is what we call a grade 2 relapse, where the deformity is fixed. There's no passive correction possible to neutral. And these are the ones where, and this is grade 2A, where you have equinus as well as inversion. You can see there is a previous scar. So child is in equinus as well as the dynamic adduction. So these are the ones where you will do a posterior release. So this is where you can see the child is in full equinus. Here you do a tear release, the capsule release, and as well as subtalar release, because you want to get the foot completely plantigrated. So rigid equinus, and varus, you could do a posterior release so that you can release the medial part of the tendon to decrease the varus at the heel. And this is how it is done. So I normally do a hemi-Cincinnati approach, and you can see the tendon actually release here. This is the Z lengthening, and this is the end of the closure. So you release the middle half of the tendon, keep the lateral half attached so that you can get the heel into eversion. And finally, you get the rigid relapses. This is again will come in the exam as a full-blown relapse with you assess the midfoot, the hind foot as well as the forefoot, and you can see almost comment on the weight bearing of the child. You can see there's hardly any weight bearing on the medial side. You can see the dirt on the lateral side. So this child is walking on the lateral border. Your heel correction is not possible. There's no dorsiflexion, and this is what is called the undercorrected foot. So you start with casting if you want initially, and then you try and do whatever surgery is possible to get the foot plantigrade. So these are the surgeries which are recommended in clubfoot, and one has to be familiar at least some of the steps. So for a mild deformity, you do only a soft tissue release. A dynamic relapse, you do a split and transfer. When they come with lateral, when they come with grade 2 or grade 3 relapse where the lateral border is fixed, you do a lateral column shortening, or what is called a cuboid shortening. You do a medial release to correct the medial tightness, and you can correct the navicular deformity as well by putting a tenonavicular wire. So you do what is called a posterior medial release along with column shortening. So you go from the most mild to the most rigid severe correction surgery, what you can do to get the foot plantigrade. Sometimes in very severe cases where the foot is deformed, one may also have to do a typical denudation osteotomy in the older child. Calcular osteotomy is done again for very, very rigid varus deformity, not commonly done, but in a child more than 8 to 10 years where there is hindfoot varus and you cannot get the foot corrected by a midfoot osteotomy, you have to do what is called a Dwyer's or a lateral column closing wedge osteotomy. Finally, you can get a dorsal bunion as well because of the forefoot dorsiflexion, and we have to fuse the great toe or the what is called the hallux MTP joint to get the dorsal bunion corrected. So just to assess the relapse again, don't forget to look at the footwear as well. Normally the parents will say that the child's heel is slipping outwards, and this is how I would assess a relapse where there is hindfoot varus, what we call a grade 2 relapse. So this is a flexible foot in the forefoot, the hindfoot is in varus. And you can see the opposite of valgus. This is the valgus foot, which is the overcorrected club foot. So always look at the footwear of the child as well when you see these children. So this is an example of the type 2B relapse, which I told you earlier, where there is a midfoot lateral curvature, the medial border is curved, and there is the heel is in neutral. So here what you do a cuboid osteotomy, a lateral column closing wedge, you do a medial cuneiform osteotomy, which is an open wedge, and I do abductor hallucis release and a tib end transfer. So you can see all three have been done. You've not done much to the hind foot. So this was a typical midfoot relapse where there is pure curvature of the forefoot and the midfoot. So these are usually Ponseti treated foot. This will not be a foot coming to you at an older age which has been not treated. Untreated club foot will have always a rigid equinus as well. So Ponseti feet will have probably a good heel, but only the forefoot goes into adduction. So this is what is done. So cuboid osteotomy fixed with wires and a medial cuneiform open wedge osteotomy so that you can maintain the length of the foot. This is what has been described. Transcuneiform osteotomy, combine lateral and medial so that you maintain the length of the foot. So you can remove a wedge from the lateral side and you can put on the medial side. So this also corrects the supination of the foot, which is very, very commonly seen with the relapsed club foot. So that is why the advantage of midfoot osteotomy is you can correct all the deformity, all the components of the forefoot and the midfoot with the one single osteotomy. And one must correct the supination as well. So in the exam, don't forget to mention the supination as well as adduction in a relapsed club foot. This is an example of the grade 3 relapse. Again, you can see the deformities in all three planes. So midfoot deformity, equinus, where deformities in two or more planes. This is where they will need a full release. So this is a classic example of, so this is like a virgin club foot which has come back following a failure of brace, and child come back with a full-blown relapse. So this is what is called a complete relapse, where all the deformities have recurred because of lack of compliance. And again, here you have to do, complete release. Now, some of the children come very old, at a very old age. So this child has about 8, 10 years, 12 years of age, where you can see a callosity on the lateral side, previous surgery done because of the, and then relapse after surgery. So this is not uncommon in the exam to get a relapsed club foot. Here you can talk about fixators if you have experience, or you talk about triple arthrodesis. If the child needs only one surgery, then as a salvage procedure, you can do only a triple arthrodesis without opening the medial side, because there's a lot of scarring here and there's very high risk of getting a neurovascular injury. So if you're familiar with Ilizaro or just fixators, you can talk about fixators, but you must be very, very confident about a frame, about a gest. Otherwise, do not discuss this. Just discuss about triple arthrodesis, which is much more easier to describe. So this is the triple arthrodesis done from the classical Olliers approach, fixed with wires. And you can see we've done a cavus release as well. And we put this wire from the calcaneum into the tibia. So just like I said, if you're familiar with JESS, you should know how to apply the JESS. You have to change the frame regularly. It will give you a stiff plantigrade foot. The correction is very good if you are familiar with the technique. So this is what some people will do for relapsed club foot with very poor skin condition. There I would use a fixator. There, you know, when the skin condition is poor, this is a technique to be used. And Ilizaro, again, for the fans of Ilizaro, the ring guys, again, they are for very rigid deformities. You must be familiar with the technique and you must know how to apply the frame. So these are salvage procedures. Again, you get a very good plantigrade foot. They are stiff, but at least the patient is able to wear a footwear. So in principle, you know, with any of these foot deformities, the idea is to always do a soft tissue release and align the joints. So with club foot, do a posterior medial release. You must know what structures to release. In the exam, you must start, you know, so you have 3 ligaments, 3 tendons, and 3 capsules. So just be familiar with that. You should know your osteotomies when to do. So whenever there's a fixed deformity, you talk about lateral column shortening and medial cuneiform open wedge. Tendon transfers is always following a correction of the foot deformity. So if it's a rigid deformity, you correct that first and then do a tendon transfer, or you do it for a dynamic deformity, either a split or a complete tib and transfer to the third cuneiform. And lastly, you need to know some salvage procedures. So your Turcos release, your whatever incision you take, you must be familiar with the Turcos release. And so there I conclude. If anybody has any question, they can always, you know, email it to me. I can share some literature, and also, you know, they can free to ask me any other queries which I have not covered, or perhaps, you know, sometimes I've gone fast to cover 2 topics in a very short time. So thank you for your attention.